Let's set the stage. It was 1965. Gas was just 30 cents per gallon. The Sound of Music premiered as a big hit, and Bill Cosby had just started acting. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were preaching about racial equality. But most importantly, US troops had invaded Vietnam. By the end of the year, around 200,000 troops were in Vietnam. My grandfather, who was a dentist, was one of those men. So I decided to interview him on his life in the Army and see what he had to say.
I was born on a dark and rainy night. Was not. August 1937 in Freelandville, Indiana. Well, I was trying to think about this earlier. We lived in Little Rock, Arkansas. We lived in Long Island, New York. We lived in Augusta, Georgia. We lived in Grass Valley, California. And all this was mostly grade school. And in between some of them, we would go to school back in Freelandville, and then we'd go somewhere else for 6 months. So we lived in a lot of different places. Later on, we did some overseas tours. We lived in the Philippines, right near Clark Air Force Base. And we also, while going to the Philippines, visited places like Hawaii, Guam, Japan. Of course, my dad was a dentist in the military. My mom, as she liked to say, was an utterly. And when people would ask her what that meant, she would say, "I'm utterly dependent." Because that's what they call the family of people who are in the military. They call them dependents.
Mm-hmm.
So, but she didn't have a job per se. After college, I went to dental school, and after I graduated from dental school, I decided to join the Army. Since my dad was a dentist in the Army, I was a dentist in the Army. My father's brother was a dentist in the Army, and my brother, who was 2 years younger than I, was also a military dentist. So at one time, there were 4 Kirchhoffs who were dentists in the military at one time. A first. Historical numero uno. Uno.
So that was a record, if you will.
It was a record. First assignment was more or less basic training in Fort Sam Houston, Texas. Following that, spent 3 years in Hawaii, a year at Walter Reed in Washington, D.C., a year at graduate school in Chicago, Loyola Chicago Dental School, and then I spent 5 years in Texas. Oh yeah, certainly. There are still people that I met, that I was friends with in Hawaii, which is my first assignment, that I still correspond with and visit occasionally. being a dentist, that particular profession was highly in need at that time because of the beginning of the Vietnam War. So there wasn't any difficulty in getting into the military. On active duty, primarily it was the Vietnamese War. I left the Army in 1972 after serving 10 years and returned to Indiana. I left the military primarily so that I could establish a more permanent home for my family. I was tired of moving so often, and so I decided to go someplace where family life would be more stable.